Hey, everybody. Welcome into the back room. I'm Andy Ostroy. We have League of Women Voters CEO Celina Stewart with us today. We'll chat with Celina in just a second. But first, thank you for tuning in. We appreciate you listening, and we'd love to hear your comments. So email us at backroomandy@gmail.com and or post on our social media, and we'll read some feedback next time. And if you like the podcast, please rate and review and follow or subscribe, and you'll be notified every time we post a new episode. So, Celina Stewart, she is the Chief Executive Officer of the League of Women Voters of the United States. Prior to joining the League, she was Acting Chief Operating Officer and Director of Philanthropy at an electoral reform nonprofit. She also served as a litigation consultant to several AM 100 law firms, handling complex merger and acquisition transactions. She also was a legislative aide at the Michigan legislature, handling the public interest portfolio for the House tax chair, and also served as legal counsel to the Minority Leader Stacey Abrams at the Georgia House of Representatives. She has served on the boards of the Bar Association of D.C., the Women's Bar Association of D.C., the NAACP, and was an American Bar Foundation Law Practice Fellow. Celina, welcome into the back room.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me.
So I want to just start off with a simple question. A lot of folks may be familiar with the name, the League of Women Voters, but perhaps may not know exactly what it does and the critical role it plays in our democracy. So can you give us a little overview of the organization and its work?
Yeah, the League was founded in 1920, just before the suffragists, or it was through the suffrage movement. And it was really launched to educate about half of the female population at that time, which represented about 10 million women. And so it was really about educating women, using their influence, whether that was with their husbands, partners, or in their communities to influence public policy and things like that. And so we have really been around for a long time, just doing a lot of civic education, civic engagement work. Obviously, people may know us from like festivals where we're registering voters and things like that. So we have been around for a while, and now we're still around, still kicking and working to build a movement to tamp down on what's happening in the country right now.
And so speaking of that, what are some examples of active cases that you're fighting and perhaps even litigating?
Yeah, so earlier this year, the Trump administration, or Trump himself, signed an EO around voting rights or voting in elections. And so we sued because the League was instrumental in the 90s in passing the National Voter Registration Act. And this was a direct threat. This is a direct threat against it. And so we were very fortunate very early on, within a couple of weeks of filing, of getting a PI motion, which basically is we were asking the court, because of the urgency of the issue, to make some early rulings in the case. And so some of that order was invalidated through the court, which we are very fortunate to have that ruling. And now we're just, fighting the rest of it out. So we have that. Obviously, there are still things happening in the country, like, redistricting is right around the corner. I know no one has time to think about redistricting because the world is literally on fire. but we still have to, plan for that and the census and all the things. But we are protesting. We are filing lawsuits to push back on what's happening in the country, whether that's through EOs or through legislation that is moving. We have been fighting consistently the SAVE Act, which just recently has moved chambers and things like that. So we're going to continue to push back on things like that, especially where it disenfranchises women, minorities, and others who are really fighting to stay engaged in American politics.
And I'm glad you mentioned the SAVE Act, because I do want to ask you about that in a couple of minutes. But, with Trump 2.0, we're seeing an unprecedented attack on our civil liberties, the rule of law, the Constitution, and our democracy itself. At the same time, we're seeing a growing resistance movement. How effective do you think this movement has been so far? And perhaps even more importantly, how critical are resistance movements like this in pushing back the kind of autocratic actions of Donald Trump?
Yeah. So earlier this year, when the Supreme Court issued a unanimous ruling to facilitate the return of Mr. Abrego Garcia, or Kilmar Abrego Garcia, the defiance of that was a huge. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about rule of law, honoring court rulings, court orders, and things like that. And so we declared a constitutional crisis at that time. And it is the first time that we have done that in our history, so it's a rare move that we made, and we didn't take it lightly. But when we did that, we also launched a Unite and Rise campaign, which is based on, just as you said, the importance of civil nonviolent resistance movements in the country. There's research done by Erica Chenoweth at Harvard that says that you just need 3.5% of the total population to do that. We're focusing on voters. So ours is 8.5. We want to bring 2/3 of that movement to, be the backbone organization doing that. But it's so critical right now. I continue to be warmed by the fact that people are showing up in the streets, that people are showing up at town halls, that they are writing letters to the members of Congress, but more importantly, they are getting assertive about what it is that they need in their communities. And that is what democracy is about. And so authoritarianism really rises in silence. It's that those little chips away at rule of law, the Constitution, and things. And if we stay silent and don't say anything, then we will be in an authoritarian regime within the next 18 months of this administration. And so I think the activism that is happening right now is so critical but it needs to be bigger. It needs to be more. So that is what we're working to build. We will not stop. We're going to continue mobilizing over the summer and through the fall, all the way up until 2026, to make sure that we can build a multi-million member movement that is multiracial, and to push back on these really anti-democratic things happening in the country right now.
And so what does it actually take to get to the kind of critical mass where you can shift the political landscape? So, for example, it seems like in our country, there are huge protests every so often. People get really jacked about it. There's all kinds of social media promotion. There'll be millions of people out across the country. And then it kind of gets a little quiet. But to reach that critical mass where it does move the needle, are we talking about every weekend? Are we talking about every other day? What does it need to look like in this country? Because I think it's important for the people at home to understand, like, going out once a month or something like that, it's better than nothing. But if you really want to change the dynamic in this country, it requires major sacrifice and time and effort.
Yeah. So it's multiple things. So the 3.5% of the total population, that's actually not a lot. That's not a lot of us. That's not even the majority of us, really. And so when we think about just the small number of people who have to act, but we can't take that for granted. We can't assume that 3.5% of the people outside of ourselves are going to act. And so I think what you're saying is really important, because all of us have to do something. Now, we are not as far along in the authoritarian takeover as other countries have before they resisted. But right now it's so critical. And so just as you were saying, one of the things that we are doing as a part of this campaign is every 90 days we have micro campaigns. And as a part of these micro campaigns, we're giving easy things that people can do monthly, weekly, and over the course of these 90 days, whether it's writing a letter, organizing a protest in front of a federal court, whether it is pushing back on Medicaid in a particular way, sharing with your community how this impacts people. Because the big ugly bill that just passed, people don't even realize, it seems harmless right now because some of the impact is not going to start happening till the end of the year. But when it hits home, it's going to hit hard. People are going to schools, people or children who are in schools who are getting meals will no longer have those meals. 17 million people will lose benefits. Like, we're talking about veterans, we're talking about seniors, we're talking about people who are lower income. And so this is really going to hit all of Americans hard. And so when we think about resistance movements, one that has to be consistent action that people can take, small acts that people can take. Because we understand people are working, people may have mobility issues, so they may not be able to go to a protest, but can they protest virtually? Can they participate in an economic boycott? Can they do a sit-in somewhere? And so really thinking about multiple ways for people to engage, and it's all of these collective small acts that push back and stop what's happening in this country. And we have to do it now. We cannot assume that we have all of this time to make it happen. Because like I said, authoritarianism doesn't come in like tanks on the street, even though in DC, that's what we saw June 14th. But it usually creeps in very slowly and almost quietly and silently. And so we just have to be on it now and just know that every single person listening can do one or two or three small acts to really make a difference.
Yeah. And money's important too. I mean, if the folks are busy,
we'll take the money.
Yeah.
We'll take the money, Andy.
If you can't get out and march, for whatever reason, or make phone calls, you can write a check, perhaps, and that's really
Yeah.
important. I mean, the organizations like the League of Women Voters, the ACLU, there's so many worthy causes, legal organizations, law firms that are fighting this kind of stuff. This administration is especially hostile towards women. They would truly love to go back to the 1950s when women were barefoot, pregnant, and subservient to men. Dobbs and the overturning of Roe v. Wade was an unconscionable assault on reproductive rights that was the result of a decades-long war waged by the religious right. They'd also love to ban contraception. Yet, Rovember in last year's election never came. What happened, especially given all that's at stake? Why didn't more women, especially young women, express the kind of anger and outrage at the polls that we all anticipated and predicted?
So I feel like women did, just in different ways. Like when you look at the states that had reproductive rights or justice on the ballot, most of those states pushed back on that and they protected it at the state level in those states that you can do an initiative. But across the country, in terms of who women selected for president and how many people voted for this particular president, it is alarming. And I think part of it is that one of the things we've been finding and just talking with people, honestly, in communities around the country is people see this as an us versus them. What won't happen to me? That's them because they're Black, because they're trans, because they're, out here doing things without contraception, all the things. Like it's all of these rationales and reasons. But the reality is that there are a lot of people in this country, particularly women, who shot themselves in the foot. And I would say white women in particular. And there are also some Latinx women who shot themselves in the foot thinking that they were protected by some layer of something. And so I think that right now is a really important reality check for a lot of people. We see it on social media, people saying, oh my God, I regret my vote. There's like a hashtag MAGA regrets, or I regret this, I regret that. And it's like, okay, well, you have to understand that when you make a decision like who's going to become president, you're often stuck with that for 4 years. That's a long time to give up a lot of stuff, whether that's your religious freedoms, your reproductive freedoms, food, access to food, all of the things. And so I think we just have to be smarter. That is why one of the things that we are doing at the League is focusing on education. I think there are many people in this country who know exactly what they're doing, but I think there's a lot of people who did not think that they would be impacted by what's happening in this country. And so I think education is going to be key in saying, this is what is going on. This is what affects your community. The League is never going to tell people who to vote for. That's not our job. That's not our role. But we do educate people about, here's the folks on your ballot and what they believe in. Here's their voting record. Like, here's how they have impacted your community specifically by the things that they have voted for. And you decide whether or not you agree with that or you don't. So I think that all of that is really important to make sure that people know, because I think there are parties in this country, one party in particular, that assumes that Americans are dumb, that Americans will not pay attention. And I don't believe that. We don't believe that, the League. We believe that if people know what is going to impact them and their families and their communities, that they will make decisions to protect those things.
Yeah, I struggle with the awareness or education issue because if we roll back the clock to October, it seems like he and the party told us exactly what they were going to do. Yeah. Yet it's just hard to believe that, and I'm not pinning this on women because people in general, and I say this as a white person, white people made some funky decisions. And elections have consequences. But it's just like we had a convicted felon, an adjudicated sexual abuser running for president. Like, I mean, that's a pretty big billboard for like how women are going to be treated in this country. But, you mentioned what I call the big ugly ass bill. On Monday, Planned Parenthood sued the Trump administration over a provision that would prevent its health centers from receiving Medicaid reimbursements. Why is this suit so important?
Oh, it's so critical. Planned Parenthood has been, I think, standing in the gap for women and communities for decades. And so I'm so proud of our friends at Planned Parenthood for standing up for the very necessary care that they know women need. It's very easy to sit in the White House and to sit in DC in this, political bubble where things don't happen. But when you get out of DC and you go to neighborhoods in Texas and Arkansas and Oklahoma and Colorado, there are people who really need these services. It's not propaganda. It's not a gimmick. This is real care that people need. And so I think Medicaid in particular, which is, you know, has a lot of is a federally tied program. It's critical for these organizations like Planned Parenthood to fight for that funding and to make sure that the people who will actually be harmed or helped, have access to their services. So I'm watching this with eyes wide open and definitely tracking it because we want to see how the court rules.
You mentioned the SAVE Act before. So it passed the House in April. It's stalled in the Senate. Talk about the huge concern over this particular measure and what the league has been doing to educate and engage Americans against it.
Oh my God, we've been doing a lot. One, because this is a direct assault on our work. And when you think about women who will be, the bill is just anti-marriage and anti-women. I just have to say that. As a woman in this country, the idea that I would have to second guess changing my name, if that's something that I legitimately want to do, there's people who choose not to do it, right? But it has been a practice for centuries, taking the name of your husband and your partner. And so the idea that you would now be penalized, it's no way in hell that your birth certificate is going to match your driver's license or anything else if you're married. Now, if you do marry somebody with the last name, that's a whole other conversation, but that could be for a lot of different reasons. But it's just like not likely to happen. And I was sitting in a restaurant several months ago, and I was talking with a friend about it, and there was a lady sitting at the bar to my left, white older lady, and she said, "Oh my God, I've been married 3 times. What the fuck?" I was like, "Oh girl, let's just talk about what your options are." Let me tell you how to fight this bill because you got a little bit more of an obstacle. But we don't think about things like that. This is people are literally, women in particular, are being penalized for doing something that has historically been encouraged throughout this country. And so I think when I think about the fact that 69 million people could be impacted, that's the number of women in this country who have changed their name for whatever reason, marriage, or whether for domestic abuse reasons or whatever, they have changed their name. And if you think about the overall turnout of 2024, it was 156 million people. So 69 million people being disenfranchised is the election. That is the election. And so we think about that and we push back on that. We will continue to push back on it. We have been in the Senate doing spotlight hearings. We have been in offices. We went to the Capitol when it was in the House, going to every single office saying why this is so bad and pushing back. And so we'll continue to do that work, and we hope it dies. We hope that it never sees the light of the day in the Senate. But if it does, we will be there to fight it.
It's astounding to me when this kind of stuff passes, like in the House or wherever, anything that is restrictive of women's rights. You'll always see like the chamber and like women congressmen are like, yeah, and they're clapping. And I'm like, what the fuck? Like, am I watching The Handmaid's Tale? Like, this affects you and every woman in your life, your daughter. You're like, why are you applauding the stripping of rights for women if you are a woman? But I guess that's the landscape we're living on right now.
I watched The Handmaid's Tale and I'm like, damn, that's sad. Oof, that's a horrible world. And then fast forward, I'm just like, holy cannoli.
Yeah, we're living it.
Here we go. I didn't realize, you just don't realize, but
well, they're very crafty. This party, this administration is very crafty right now. They're finding technical ways to do the obvious, but not in an obvious way. So, for example, the SAVE Act, right? It's like, okay, well, we can't deny women the right to vote, but what we could do is make it really complicated. Or we can't literally throw people off Medicaid, but what we can do is change that application so folks, they just throw their hands up in the air and they say, screw it, whatever, I'll go without insurance. Or the Alien Enemies Act. Like they're spending so much time and money going through every law that was ever passed in this country or every loophole or angle that they can come up with. And it's just literally all to disenfranchise voters, take away rights from women, from minorities, punish and brutally discriminate against immigrants. I mean, it is just astounding what is happening in this country, which is why organizations like yours are so important.
Yeah, and that's why we have been focusing on putting a face to it. I feel like the first 100 days, there was all this like you said, crafty language, like it's not going to affect them. Like, then why are you doing this spending so much time and energy on a bill that's not going to have any impact? It just doesn't make sense, right? So what we have been focusing on, let's put a face to this. We saw a version of the SAVE Act, the state level SAVE Act passed in New Hampshire. And that election was a shit show. Like there were people who were turned away. Like we saw it happen. And so it's just like, this is not conjecture. This has already happened in states that have similar provisions in their states. And New Hampshire's, kind of getting its butt handed to them, and they should be because it's an awful bill and it disenfranchises women in particular. And so my hope is that by putting a face to this and really making it real to people, this is not our imagination. This is already happening, and you could be next. There is no us versus them. This is all of us being impacted by what these people in Congress are doing that's going to disenfranchise and harm us all. And so we have to stand up, do not take it for granted. And, this is the time to really lean in. I mean, it's just unfortunate. You read we've all read history and read about the stories of the civil rights movement, the Jim Crow era, but it's like now we're in it. Like it's our turn. It's our turn to stand up. It's our turn to do something. And we are writing history right now. And so it's just like, which side of the fence are you going to be on? Are you going to be someone who you can say to your grandchildren, I fought for this. I fought for you to have freedom, liberty, and all the things, fairness? Or are you going to say that I was scared, I didn't have the courage to stand up, and the world crashed?
Yeah. Well, here's something that scares the hell out of me. The Department of Justice is exploring whether they can bring criminal charges against state or local election officials if the Trump administration determines, think about that for a second, if they have not sufficiently protected computer systems from fraud. When you think about the midterms, everybody says, oh, the midterms, if we could just get to the midterms, we could change it. Like, I worry about if we're going to have midterms.
Right.
And again, not in the way of like, I'm Donald Trump and I hereby cancel the midterms, but doing it the crafty way. So this is the
Right.
crafty way, going after the Brad Raffenspergers, the heroes of 2020 and, election commissions, people who run the state and local elections. And now they have to worry about being criminally prosecuted by the Department of Justice just for doing their job. This is so dangerous, isn't it?
It's incredibly dangerous. And this is, in the classic playbook of authoritarianism, like undermining the media, undermining people who do not seem like loyalists or trying to get people through other means to become complicit to a loyalist regime and all the things. So I think it's so critical that we push back on this. Not only, I mean, there's just so many things to push back on. And like I said, you don't have to do everything. There's going to be organizations like the League, like ACLU and others who are watching and pushing back and waiting for that opportunity to make some noise and make sure people understand how harmful these things are. But the other thing is we can't lay down and take it. Like, especially these elected officials in the state. It's like you all have autonomy and you need to be standing up right now or else you're going to lose, because it may be you this time or your neighbor this time and then you the time after that. And so I'm truly hoping, and I know that there has been some conversations at least by local election officials to push back on this, and they absolutely should. They absolutely should.
It was so encouraging and inspiring what we saw in 2020 when both Democratic and Republican election officials who take great pride over the elections that take place in their states and cities and local municipalities pushed back. And I'm hoping we'll see that again. But, it was different then. It's much different now. Donald Trump and the power that he had then is much different than the power that he has now. And I think the fear factor, the intimidation factor, and you have senators like Lisa Murkowski saying, I'm afraid. What? Like, U.S. senators are publicly saying they're afraid. And then you see a guy like Tom Tillis, who, in order to do the right thing on the bill last week, he has to first quit. This is where we're at. So it's a little murky out there. But the Department of Homeland Security has, for the first time, built a national citizenship database. This combines information from immigration agencies and the Social Security Administration. What's the concern here?
One, there's been so many people who've been dismissed from their jobs at the federal government. So I worry about whether or not there's even capacity in the federal government. But more importantly, what do they need this information for?
Right.
Like, I'm always thinking about the why. Why do you need this? What are you planning to do with it, et cetera? We already see the second coming of slavery happening right before our eyes, and people are not alarmed. Like, when you see people literally snatched off the streets, citizens, naturalized individuals, people who are in the process of being snatched off the streets, detained, not fed, not treated humanely, and then ultimately put on a boat or train or whatever, plane, and shipped to a foreign land. This is slavery. This is slavery happening in our country again. And so I'm, and I know that that can be a scary analogy and it can be, hit a chord with people, but we have to be thinking about how dangerous this stuff is. And we have to be able to say it. We have to call a thing a thing. And so I think that you're absolutely right. When you were talking just a moment ago about elected officials, that is often very common. The people who are running our elections are our neighbors. These are people in the community who just want to do a good job. And one of the things that we had following, leading up to the 2024 election is, in our league in Kansas, there was a law that would criminalize both civil and criminal penalties for registering voters, giving people water in Georgia.
Right.
And so I'm just like, what the hell? Do you understand how in Georgia in particular, sometimes the lines are 6 hours long? So the idea that we are just watching these awful things happening. And again, I understand people are overwhelmed. I was overwhelmed. Like there were times I couldn't even look at the news. I'm like, look, I'm just gonna wait for that shit tomorrow because it's a lot going on today.
We
But
just,
we have to call it out.
yeah, well, we just passed July 4th, Independence Day. I spent the day, I spent the day with family, so most of the day was very pleasant. But internally, politically, I was outraged because you have almost half of this country celebrating our independence from King George III, the British monarchy, right?
Mhm.
It's the day we signed the Declaration of Independence, Second
Yeah.
Constitutional Congress. At the same time, they're supporting a king wannabe who wants to
Yeah.
turn America into a monarchy. And I'm like, what the fuck? Like, do people just not get it? Do they not make this is the thing I don't get. It's like, USA, 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 they send their kids off to war, the military, you're fighting tyranny abroad, but yet here at
Yeah.
home, you are enabling the same shit that you're fighting overseas. And I just don't get it. So what do you think it is about this country today? Do they just not get it? Or to your point, is it that old adage of like first they came for the whatever, and then when they came for me, there was nobody left to help me? Like, do they just not
Right.
think it affects them? Or is it just
Yeah. I think,
indifference? Or is it racism? I think underlying
there's so
all of
many
this
things.
is racism. That's why Kamala lost, like it's sexism. But I just don't get it because it is starting to really impact them. And yet
Yeah. And I
still,
think that is the danger of the us versus them paradigm. We have got to get out of that because if let's just play this out. Let's play it out like all of the folks who are Latino or Latinx will be removed from the country, whether they are citizens or not. Who's next? Who's the next minority?
mhm.
Maybe Black people. I don't think we're going out like that, but I think I think we're ready to fight again. But then it's Black people, then it's trans people. So at some point, if we play this out, it's nothing but white people in the country. Who is going to be next? It's going to be poor people. It's going to be people who are German. It's going to be people who are like, it will never stop.
Well, guess
And
what?
so,
Hey, remember Adolf Hitler? Remember his ideal of the perfect race?
yeah,
As a short little dark-haired guy, ugly, his vision was tall, blonde, and beautiful, right? Well, we know Donald
yeah.
Trump loves nines and tens, right? So to your point, when it's just white people
Andy,
left,
I am not going here with this with you today.
well, you
I'm
don't
not
have
going
to.
there.
You don't have to, but I'll say it. When it's just white people left, then he's gonna be like, all right, let's get rid of the fat people, let's get rid of the ugly people,
Yeah,
let's get rid of all the fives and the sixes. That's
I
how
know.
do we not learn from history?
Yeah. And unless you're like, 80 and thinking that you're on your way out of this mug, like if you're here 20, 30, 40, like it's a long way to go. It could be a long way to go before this transition of life happens. And so I'm just like, we cannot feel like we are exempt.
No.
No
Well,
matter who you are, you cannot think that there is an exemption. There is no exemption for total control. There isn't.
well, let me ask you this in our last couple of minutes. There's something really interesting happening in New York City. You have a 33-year-old Muslim Democratic
Yeah.
Socialist named Zoran Mamdani who
Mhm.
appears on track to become the next mayor of New York City. The macro question I want to ask you is when a pendulum swings so far to the right, The necessary reaction to that, the response to that politically, is that the pendulum then also swings very far to the left. And that is the actual way you combat the right-wing extremism, because the middle can't survive. They suffocate.
Yeah.
And somebody said last week or the week before that every day that Donald Trump does something awful makes it easier for President AOC. And so what do you make of what's happening in New York City when we have this euphoria, this movement? Young people are so energized and engaged. Do you think that's the beginning of something?
Tired. We tired. But I'm not tired enough. I'm still going to fight. But no, I think you're right. What's so funny about this is that no one expected it. Like people were just like, okay, he's on the ballot, but he was door knocking. He was in neighborhoods. He was getting to know communities. He was kissing the babies and shaking the hands, and he won.
And doing those TikToks.
I know. and TikTok. People need to not underestimate the power of TikTok.
Nope.
But but he was doing those things, and he did not win by like a point. He won by a substantial margin. And so I think he is, a force to be reckoned with. I think he is someone that people are going to continue to watch. And I already see like the fighting happening. He's this, he's that, there's going to be several ad campaigns about him and how horrible it is. They're going to find like a monkey in the basement or something from with him. But I think his energy is amazing. I think that it's amazing that young people came to turn out. And I hope that it also gives people both in and outside of New York hope that something else is possible. And I think that is really compelling and inspiring for so many to know that this underdog, and everyone loves an underdog story, right? To me, I feel like that's an American pastime, like loving of the underdog. And this was someone who no one saw coming, or certainly didn't see him winning the mayor race, given who was in the race with him. So I'm watching, we're keeping our eyes on that. Obviously, our New York League continues to educate voters about, who's on their ballot. Of course, we are nonpartisan, so we don't support or oppose candidates, but this will be important for New Yorkers in particular to come out and say what direction they want their government to go.
Yeah, that's, I think, the bigger point is what does this mean for the rest of the country? Celina, thank you so much for coming on. This was great, and I do hope you'll come back and chat with us again.
Thank you so much.
Take care. This episode of The Back Room was edited and produced by me, Andy Ostroy. It was co-edited and co-produced by Maddie Rosenberg and co-produced by Jen Hammoud. Our theme song was composed by Andrew Hollander, and our logo was designed by Cricket Langell. And special thanks to Patricia Wind. Please take a moment to rate and review the podcast, and also follow or subscribe. Until next time, keep your eyes on Washington, Hollywood, and your own backyards, and have a great week.